I'm Louis Sheequin, the Executive Director of Abode Services.
Okay, thank you.
What is the best part about your job?
Best part of my job. I've been doing this for almost 25 years, and the favorite part of my job is growing our impact year over year. So we were a very small organization when we started, and now we're the largest homeless service and housing organization in the Bay Area, actually. So that's kind of fun.
And what challenges do people face when trying to resolve homelessness?
Oh, well, I think the first problem is stigma. Stigma is misunderstanding a group of people, labeling people. It's prejudice, right? So I think there are misunderstandings in the general public about homelessness, homeless people, and it's often based on biases or lack of information. And also can be related to disability, mental health. A lot of people who are homeless either have serious mental health issues or they have temporary mental health issues because they're homeless. It's pretty depressing to be homeless. So we have a lot of judgment in our society about having those problems. And quite frankly, it's not helpful. It actually makes it worse. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is overcoming people's stereotypes, fears. And you know, it's interesting because in my experience, it's usually not young people like yourself, but it's adults who have this. Sometimes adults in authority can be the worst.
For youth, where do you think is a safe place to go when they're in distress, when they're trying to run away?
Yeah, you know, there's quite frankly not enough services to help youth when they run away. A lot of assistance happens informally with friends. People stay with families, friends of theirs. There's a lot of that goes on here in Fremont, for example. But if people don't have those sort of networks, they end up sort of falling between the cracks and end up even sometimes out on the street.
And how did Abode actually start out?
We started in the 80s when the problem of homelessness increased dramatically, primarily as a result of a massive cutback in housing resources. And at the same time, housing costs increased dramatically. So Abode was started by the faith community and leaders at the city of Fremont and other local cities as a way to begin to shelter homeless people. But we found out rapidly that shelter is not enough. That's a temporary stay for people, and that's helpful. But homeless people ultimately need a home. It's kind of that simple. So what isn't simple is actually creating the homes. So we did a lot of work to create homes, housing opportunities for people. And we do that either by buying people's rent down to a level they can afford, or in many instances, we actually build the buildings where people can live.
How does Adobe help
Abode.
Abode get the resources needed to provide for homelessness in teens?
Good question. So Abode receives a lot of its financial support through contracts with government. So we're doing the sort of things that government really can't do to help people. So they provide a contract and fund what we're doing. But we also rely on the support of the local community, individual donations, in kind. Sometimes people donate food or other items, but often financially, and that helps us fill the cracks around the financing.
And then how big of a problem is teen homelessness in America on a scale of 1 in 10, and why?
That's hard to answer. I think any teen homelessness is really dangerous because, as you probably know, I mean, you're at a point where you need a lot of support and you're developing fast. Your brains are in fast development mode, and all that could be put at risk if you're put into trauma. And when you're a teen, trauma is really a bad thing because your brain is forming its adult mind, and at that moment, if you're flooded with stress hormones, it's actually really detrimental to your health. So my answer would be any homelessness in youth is, or even younger kids, is really, really dangerous, and therefore I don't really want to grade it on a scale. We have an awful lot of teen homelessness in this country, either teens with family members or teens who are homeless on their own. A lot of teen homelessness, go a little beyond your question, comes out of foster care. So foster care is where young people go when they're taken away from their families. Families that can't take care of them anymore, families that are abusing the kids, and the foster care system is there to help them. But foster care is not a complete system. It doesn't work very well for a lot of youth, and they end up running away from foster care situations, or they're kicked out at age 18, and then they have to figure that out on their own. We have a couple programs focused on trying to help people transition out of foster care into adulthood, because we see this as a high value.
So what's some advice you can give to teenagers who are going to get kicked out or run away from home or have already homeless?
Yeah. I would be careful giving specific advice, because sometimes people need to leave. Sometimes teens need to leave their home if they're being abused. But if it isn't a question of abuse, say you're just in really, really disagree with your parents, or you're having constant verbal arguments, that is, my advice would be to get help. And you can get help for yourself, but you can also advocate for your whole family to go for counseling and get assistance. So I think that's what I would say. I would really hesitate to give everyone the same advice, but either way, you shouldn't do it on your own. And it's when you do anything on your own like that that you probably get in the most trouble.
What are some other resources, like if someone is not able to like get to Abode or like a center, like what would you?
Well, I think there are some obvious ones in your daily life. So there's the counselors at your school. There is youth services in the city of Fremont, for example, that the city runs, and so you can get assistance there. And then there are nonprofit organizations in the community that provide specific assistance to young people. I am not up on all those right now, so what I often do is refer people to the phone number 211, which is like 911, but it's not an emergency. It's for when you need help with finding the right sort of services in the community. So for example, say you have a friend who's suicidal, who thinks they might want to take their life. 211 can help you refer them to a place where a phone line that helps them talk out their problems. It's also a phone number you can call to figure out what to say to your friends and what not to say. So I rely heavily on that. 211.
What's the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part? I think running a nonprofit, we're always worried about having enough resources, enough money to do what we do, and that can be the hardest part of my job every day, is trying to make sure there's enough dollars to keep the doors open.
And how do people typically become homeless, and what do you think they can do to prevent it?
Typically, people become homeless. In the end, it's all about not having enough affordable housing. So if housing was cheap and affordable and accessible, people wouldn't have homelessness. They would have problems, but they wouldn't have to be out in the streets. So that's where I always start. That's where it begins and ends, is the access to having a home. But there's a whole slew of other problems. I mentioned one already, foster care. So when young people in foster care turn 18, they're basically turned out on their own. And if they don't have family connection, so just imagine this for yourself. If you don't have anyone to fall back on, your parents can't help you get to the first apartment, they can't help you with college, they can't help you with all the things that you're probably thinking they might be able to help you with, then you're going to be in real dire straits. And that's what often happens to kids in foster care. There also, in this country, there's a lack of discharge planning that really makes sense. So if someone is really poor and they end up with a severe mental health issue or a severe physical problem and they end up in a hospital, there isn't a process then to move them into housing as they recuperate and get better. So often people go to a hospital or a psychiatric facility. They might even get better while they're there, but there's no what's next, and they end up homeless on the streets. And this is why, homelessness actually costs society a lot of money, because it costs a lot more to have someone live on the streets than to provide them a home. If you can imagine all the emergency services they need, the most costly health care you can provide anyone is in the emergency room. So they end up going there when they have a dire physical problem. And when they're in their own housing, maybe they go to a clinic that's a lot cheaper, for example. So not doing anything about homelessness is really kind of economically stupid, because it costs us a lot of money. Of course, there's compassion too. I mean, that's why I do this work, but it's also economically not a good idea.
And one last one.
Yeah.
What led you to help people?
When I was in high school, I became very committed to social justice. I grew up in a family who was committed to the civil rights movement. Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King, these people made a real impact on my parents and therefore made an impact on me. So when I grew up, I tried to figure out a way to apply that philosophy of life, and this is a good way to do it. Every day I'm making a difference for people.
That's it.
Good?